Rakers, a science fiction action adventure. Part 3, Casualties. Chapter 21. Morning Moods. If there had ever been a more confusing day, JC couldn't remember it, starting with slapping her father and then spending 7 long periods expecting endless mockery. Jokes for her dad busting up a party, but there hadn't been any. Danny at lunch had come by to ask where she'd gone last night. JC made up an excuse about homework, and Danny had shrugged, said that the party hadn't lasted much longer anyway. Veronica, it seemed, had vanished, and people started to feel weird hanging around her house without her there. Allie didn't even make a big deal out of it, dropped JC back home after school, and told her that it was probably good anyway. Tuesday parties weren't exactly a plus for their grades or their energy. There'd be plenty more. So JC didn't know what to feel as she went up the driveway and the short walk to the house. Angry at her dad? Sure. Faye didn't deserve anything less for last night, but the fallout had been so non-existent that maybe it wasn't worth freaking out about. Her life, turns out, was not over. "Hey, Dad," JC called out as she stepped through the doorway, set her backpack down next to the stairs as she leaned over to take off her shoes. "JC," Faye announced from the kitchen. "Glad you're back. I've got a plan for us tonight, so don't tell me you have a lot of homework." "Just the usual crushing amount," JC replied. "What were you thinking?" "Let's go out," Faye called back. "Pick a place and we'll get a table. Make an evening of it." Ah, the makeup routine. JC recognized this one. Fade went back to it whenever he screwed up. Dinner somewhere nice, maybe a movie or trip to a store she liked. Bribery, namely. Not that JC minded. After all, if her dad wasn't going to change his behavior, she might as well profit from it. Still, after last night, she mostly wanted to sleep. JC went back to the kitchen, partly to get a glass of water, partly to see what her dad was doing back there. Turned out Fade was standing over the oven, setting a timer. "What are you doing?" JC tried to look around Fade, see what was in the oven, but couldn't get a glimpse through the small window. "It's a surprise. Should be ready by the time we get home." "You're trying to bake something?" "It's a recipe for dessert when we get home. How hard can it be?" Fade sounded wounded. JC laughed. "Dad, if you pull this off, I'll be so impressed." "Well then, prepare to be amazed." "Whatever you say." JC poured herself some water. "I'm going upstairs quick, then we can figure out somewhere to go. Swap out the school clothes for something a little more refreshing." The day had turned warm, and if JC had the option, she wanted to go somewhere a little fancier. Delight in a dish that they couldn't make themselves at home. Souffle, maybe. Or sushi. The doorbell knocked her out of the foodie fantasy. She heard her father calling from the kitchen, asking if she could get it. "Why can't you?" JC called down from the top of the stairs. "I'm making the frosting," Fade replied. Frosting. Fade must be feeling really bad to be going through all this trouble. JC shook her head, let slip a small smile. Her father was far from perfect, but at least he tried. She hopped down the stairs, finished adjusting her dress, and opened the door. On the other side stood what she swore was a cowboy. Wide-brimmed hat and everything. But her attention zeroed in on what he was holding. A pistol aimed directly at her. "Now you must be the daughter we heard so much about." The cowboy stared at her and grinned. Chapter 22. Doormat Standoff. "They're back, help." Fade dashed off the text to Talia as soon as he heard Lode's voice coming from the front door. He put the phone in his pocket, reached over to the wooden block full of cutlery and pulled out the ludicrously sharp chef's knife, held it ready, and waited behind the wall. "Who are you?" Fade heard JC ask the question, heard the tremor in her voice. "You're not going to shoot me, are you?" "Name's Lode, and I'm not planning on it. Then again, things don't always go according to plans." Lode had threatened his daughter. If Fade hadn't already marked the cowboy for an untimely demise, he sure had now. There weren't many cardinal sins in his world, but taking aim at an innocent child was the top one. Problem was, Fade didn't have an angle. His only advantage right now was surprise. You going to let me in, or do I have to stand out here all awkward on your front porch? Lode continued. I don't know, JC countered. Seems like it's better for me if we keep this in the open. One person walks by and sees you with a gun like that in this neighborhood. We'll have police here within a minute. You ever try counting to 60 seconds? Lode said. It's a long time. Plenty for me to do what I came here to do and walk back out this door. You wouldn't get away dressed like that. I don't need to. Fade aimed high, stepped around the corner and launched the knife, sent it twirling through the air over JC's head and right into Lode's chest, an inch below the cowboy's neck. Run, JC, Fade yelled as he followed the throw. Only instead of brushing by the cowboy and heading to freedom, JC scrambled back towards the stairs, pulling at the door to slam it in the cowboy's face. Lode leaned in with his right shoulder, pushing back into the door as JC tried to shut it. Barging it back open, bringing the pistol up and aiming it at Fade's head. As the cowboy centered, Fade went by the couch, grabbed a small yellow pillow with a flower print on it, and whipped it at the cowboy. Struck Lode in the face, caused no damage but made the man blink, which gave Fade enough time to grab Lode's hand, holding the gun, and tear the pistol away. Before Lode could react, Fade threw the pistol back down the hallway and then, using his grip on Lode's right arm, pulled the cowboy into the house, tripping him over Fade's left leg. Lode hit the tile floor, the wide-brimmed hat flying away, and Fade delivered a hard kick to the cowboy's kidneys. Knelt down and jabbed his left forearm into Lode's neck. With his right hand, Fade reached into Lode's other holster, removed the second pistol, and sent it flying after the first. He heard JC yell, and Fade turned to see Eve coming fast up the walk. Fade kicked the front door shut as Eve came up, heard the thud as she smacked into it. Then Lode rolled, pulled Fade around until the cowboy sat on top. Lode balled his right hand into a fist, and Fade expected it to come crashing towards his head. So Fade pointed the fingers on his left hand and jabbed them into Lode's neck, sent the cowboy coughing and choking off of him. Fade scooted back to his feet as the front door popped open again. Eve standing there, ready to go for a round. Don't move! Fade heard his daughter shout from behind him, followed Eve's eyes back to her. JC stood in the hall between the living room and the kitchen, her face full of frenzied, determined fear, holding one of Lode's pistols and aiming it at Eve. To Fade's knowledge, JC had never fired a gun in her life, had no idea how to cock a pistol other than what she'd seen in movies. There was, at best, an equal chance of a shot hitting him as it would Eve, or the house. I'd listen to the girl, Fade said to Eve. I take her to the range all the time. She's a crack shot, hits you right between the eyes. That's right. JC's voice didn't even tremor. Fade felt a surge of pride. That's his girl. Then don't shoot, Eve said, looked down at Lode, who stayed on the ground, massaging his throat. We can talk instead. It took a minute for them to reorient, for Lode and Eve to take up spots on the couch with Fade standing over them. JC, still holding the gun, sat on the stairway and watched. Fade thought about making her go, but truth be told, he didn't mind the backup. Lode had pulled the knife out with only a bit of blood on the tip, looked awfully unconcerned about the fact that he'd just been pierced by a big blade. Neither one of them seemed the slightest bit hurt after Talia's car had knocked them off of a cliff. Whomever these two were, Fade didn't want to face them alone. So talk, Fade pointed at Eve. You first, because Billy the kid over here seems touchy. I'm nothing compared to him, Lode muttered. I said her, Fade countered. Who are you two? Like I said before, Eve sat back on the couch. We work to prevent Earth and humanity from slipping too far into decline, past a point where we can't recover. See, that sounds awful vague. Try it after a few whiskeys, Lode said. It'll make more sense then. Eve shot the cowboy a glare and Lode rolled his eyes. Tell me, Fade, you do this work for money, yes? Fade felt his daughter's eyes on him. He'd known this moment would come eventually, the time when he couldn't hide what he did from JC. He just hadn't expected it to occur with a cowboy and a workout video actress sitting in his living room. I take contracts, Fade said. Don't see how that has anything to do with you or your grand statement. Everyone's actions affect the course of the world at large, Eve continued. Some people have a greater affect than others. Sure, makes sense. Only I'm not the president. I don't have nukes. Tell you what, Lode interrupted. We were as surprised to see you come up as you were to see us. Fade thought about telling the cowboy to shut up, but refrained. At this point, what did it matter? Nothing was making sense. You say you do contracts? Eve said. They might have ripples beyond your small sphere. One wrong death, one kidnapping could change everything. Fade glanced at his daughter. She was staring at him, her mouth open. Her eyes in that wide look they held whenever they had a scary movie night. Getting back to normal after this was going to take a long time. So you're saying something I do is going to slide the world into chaos? Fade said, folding his arms. You two look a little old to be on drugs this strong. Fade's phone buzzed in his pocket. Thalia, hopefully. A little late, but he'd be happy for the reinforcements. He took it out, kept his eyes on Eve and Lode, swiped up to answer. Get down now! Thalia's shout came through the phone. Fade acted on instinct, dove to the floor and yelled for everyone else to do the same. Behind him, their big, beautiful front window exploded as bullets sprayed into their living room. Chapter 23. Real neighborly. Thalia heard the staccato burst over the phone, pops that sounded like toys coming through the small speakers. She could see the flashes through her windshield from a muzzle poking out the side window of a large white SUV parked in front of Fade's house. There were two of the big cars, and men and women were starting to pour out of them, heading towards the house and carrying weapons. Apparently, the two weirdos had brought backup this time. Thalia slipped out her driver's door, went to the back of the loaner and popped the trunk, took out the rifle. Gunfire rang down the street, ruining every one of the suburban evening plans ready to commence around her. Walks around the neighborhood? Not happening. Pleasant dinner conversation? Totally dead now. Mow the lawn? Only if short grass meant more to you than being perforated by stray bullets. She set the rifle's box on the trunk, glanced up to see if anyone had noticed her. Not yet. She was almost a block away after all. Thalia noticed the attackers were taking cover though, pressing up against the walls of the house or shrinking back behind the SUVs. Return fire heading their way. Single shots. Louder bangs than the automatics being used against them. Maybe Fade had decided he had to actually pull a trigger again. She couldn't imagine him bothering with a gun, though, unless JC was inside. They could kill her. That would get Fade changing his mind. Thalia sprung the box and snapped the rifle parts together, linking the long barrel with the body and slotting on the short-range scope. She lifted the rifle out, laid on the street behind the car, and settled the rifle against her shoulder. A grinding noise started to her right, and Thalia glanced to see a garage door opening. As it rose, Thalia saw a child's feet patter on the concrete, then hop into a vehicle. The door lifted more to reveal a minivan and a mother with wide eyes looking down the driveway right at Thalia, at her rifle. Thalia stared back at her, and the mother jerked open the door to the minivan and jumped in. The engine started, and a second later the van flew back out of the driveway, veered into the street, and shot off and away. Fewer potential casualties. Back down the scope, Thalia sighted it on a pair of attackers lined up next to the front door. One of them swung out in front, fired twice at the door in the lock, then raised their leg to kick the door in. Thalia pulled the trigger. Unlike the cowboy and his friend, this guy didn't take the shot well. It blew into his side and knocked him to the ground. The woman standing with him, to her credit, didn't take more than an instant to understand what had happened. She raised her automatic rifle and sprayed shots Thalia's way. Not very accurate at that range, but Thalia shrank back anyway, winced at the sound of bullets driving into the loaner car's side. The hood. Every one of those meant more money out of her pocket, money that she worked damn hard for. After a few seconds, the spray stopped. Thalia leaned back around, but the woman wasn't by the door anymore. She was dragging her friend, the one Talia had shot, back towards the SUVs, which made her an easy target. Talia aimed, fired, hit the woman in the chest. Another one down, but there were plenty more. Talia moved the rifle back towards the house. The front door stood open. Either she'd missed a pair, or Fade was inviting them in. Squealing rubber had Talia looking up from the scope. Someone else fleeing the fight? She stood slowly, the sound coming towards her, peered into the rear windshield over her loaner, and saw the back of one of the white SUVs. Coming towards her. Fast! Talia turned, dropped the rifle, and heard the sound of metal crunching on metal, and then everything was gone. Chapter 24. New friends. Find the objective. The phrase blasted through Fade's mind as bullets shot overhead. The number one rule if he came under a surprise assault: take out the target and run, or find the target and keep them safe. In the immediate moment, don't worry about anything else. Easier said than done, of course. Fade looked for his daughter from the carpet. She'd been over by the stairs, covering Lode and Eve with a pistol she didn't know how to shoot. Fade caught JC's eyes, looking back at him, frozen in what was either fear or shock or both. He held up a hand, palm out. Stay there. JC nodded. Good. Still coherent. There wasn't a direct line of sight from the window to the stairs, not unless whomever was shooting stood right outside. Fade shifted, used his feet and knees to turn himself around so he could get a look through that window. Blue sky turning orange at sunset. Minimal clouds. No targets. And then the noise stopped. Car doors slammed. If Fade had to guess, this was about to get close quarters, which meant he needed to get off the ground. My pistol, Lode said, and Fade saw the cowboy crawl up next to him. Give it to me. That seems like a bad idea, Fade countered. He still held the six-shooter in his right hand, where the cowboy couldn't plug him with it. These aren't friends, Lode said. We'll help you. A bang came from the door. Someone tested the handle, and then a man sailed in through the open window, jumping in and angling a snub-nosed submachine gun at them. Fade started to roll when Eve, crouching off to the side, leapt and tackled the man in midair. They hit the floor next to Fade, and he saw Eve smash the man's head into an end table. He went limp. See? Lode growled. Give it! Fade could respect a persuasive argument. Fade slid the pistol along the carpet. Eve turned back to the window, the submachine gun now in her hands. Sprayed some fire outside, presumably to make someone dive for cover. Lode snagged the pistol and rolled to the far side of the window, opposite Eve and Fade, rose to a kneel and started popping off rounds. 2 SUVs, Eve said. White ones, loaded with people. Eve glanced at Fade. Get your daughter out of here. We'll handle them. Not going to argue. Fade rose to a crouch, went over the fallen man's body to the stairs. JC watched him the whole way, holding the pistol in a two-handed death grip. Noises outside the door. Fade went to the first step as a pair of shots rang out and bits of the door blew away. The lock gone. Eve shifted to cover the door when a louder bang sounded. A pained yell. The door stayed shut. Fade knew that sound, Thalia providing cover. He'd owe her big for this one. JC! Fade reached his hand toward his daughter. Come on, we need to get you away from here. Down to the basement. His daughter looked at him, frightened. The pistol stayed covering the door. JC! Fade reached out and grabbed his daughter's arm, kept himself out of the pistol's sights and squeezed. Come back to me! Another loud bang. Thalia doing work with that rifle. Lode punctuating the in-between with pistol shots. No peace. Fade pulled now, dragging JC down the stair. The motion seemed to bring her back, at least a little, and JC stood as they reached the bottom. The front door, Fade noticed, had swung open. A breeze rolling through the house, and without a knob or a lock, the door moved loose on its hinges. Outside, Fade could see an SUV's tires squeal as it shot back away from the house. More of the attackers were in the front yard, though, all sporting black athletic gear, Unbranded, quality stuff that Fade wouldn't mind getting his own hands on someday. Wait, a breeze? Fade pulled JC behind him as they went towards the back of the house. Eve and Lode continued providing covering fire out front. As Fade stepped close to the kitchen, he slowed, then let go of JC's hand. Stepped around the corner, swinging his hand in a punch. It connected with someone, a man waiting on the other side. He stumbled back as Fade continued forward, glanced up only to take Fade's foot to the face. That knocked the man into the counter and down in a heap. Shots fired and Fade dove as they peppered the kitchen backsplash, gray and blue tiles that Fade had put up over a series of long evenings. That had been hard work, damn it. Get going, Fade yelled at JC, who finally decided to listen, and failed. Instead of going to the basement, JC went for the door in front of her face, the one that went right into the bathroom. The door slammed shut and clicked a second later. Not perfect, but for now, JC was safe enough, objective secured. The next attacker came through the deck door, aiming her shotgun toward Fade. He kicked one of their kitchen chairs from the floor, sending it skidding across the tile to hit the woman's knees as she came into the house. Tripped her up so that she hit the floor. Fade tore the gun away from her, whacked her on the temple with the haft. Then a third man barreled into him, driving Fade back into his own refrigerator. The man pressed his elbow into Fade's neck, and Fade felt the warm nozzle of a recently fired handgun push into his side. "Who are you?" the man asked. Fade could see a small mic threading from the man's ear to his mouth. A coordinated unit, then. Not a junk outfit. "You're the ones in my house," Fade croaked, "but you're not the target. Not feeling that at the moment." Fade felt with his left hand. The cutlery block was right next to the freezer, and if he could get a handle on a knife... "Unfortunate," the man said. "We've just been cleared to remove you." "Sorry." Fade grabbed a handle and swung. Hope for a steak knife, a serrated one maybe, or as Fade saw the side of the thing smack into the man's face, the cheese spreader, a wide and flat tool with barely a blade to speak of. But the man hesitated, perhaps assuming he'd been cut, and Fade brought his own elbow down on the gun, knocked it out of the man's hand. Then Fade, with spots starting to float in front of his eyes as the man's elbow pressed harder, kneed his attacker in the stomach. The man stumbled back and Fade dropped to the floor, caught himself on his hands, coughed again and again as his lungs burned. Choking was the worst, simply the worst thing. Fade would take gunshots, stabs, any sort of pain over choking. Just made him feel so helpless. The attacker wasn't done. He stepped into a kick, one that Fade dimly saw and connected. Fade felt the world blur as he tumbled to his right, rose to a crouch as the man picked up his gun from the ground, started walking towards Fade, raised the gun for the kill shot. Always know your surroundings. Another maxim, and this was Fade's home. Fade gripped and pulled, yanking the fridge door out, putting it between him and the man. Then Fade rolled to the side as the man fired a pair of shots into it. The bullets burst through, shattering mustard and barbecue sauce all across the floor. Fade stood, his back to the body of the fridge. He could still hear gunfire from the front of the house. Lode seemed to be laughing. Not that Fade needed more evidence to know the cowboy was crazy. "You know what you're doing," the man said, whipping the refrigerator door closed. Fade saw his shadow on the floor, circling wide around the fridge, approaching at a distance this time. "I'll give you that much." "You're no slouch yourself." Fade glanced around for any tool, anything he could throw. But before he could determine whether ripping a picture off the wall was a feasible move, the man had stepped around the fridge a few feet away, out of reach. "Wait," Fade said, sticking up his hands. "I'm not the target." The man cocked his head, aimed the gun. "Sorry." The bathroom door opened beside him. "Am I the target?" JC stood there. The man looked, and JC cocked him with the butt of the pistol. The man fell away, holding his nose, raised the gun towards JC, but didn't get a chance to pull the trigger. Fade hit him hard with his shoulder, drove the man into the glass door leading out into the backyard, followed the man through the shattered shards and kicked away the gun. Was about to knock the man out too when sirens echoed down the street. Hesitated, The attacker used it, scrambled up and backed away from Fade. 3 steps away and the man turned and ran, hopping a fence and vanishing between a pair of houses. Fade turned and saw the other 2 that he'd knocked out were gone as well. Apparently, he wasn't hitting as hard these days. Fade went back through the broken door, confirmed that JC had shut herself in the bathroom again, and went slow to the front. Sitting on the couch, alone and battered, was Eve. The submachine gun and its empty clips were scattered on the carpet. The walls and furniture were destroyed. Bullet holes riddled everything. "Where's Load?" Fade said. He couldn't see the cowboy anywhere. "They took him." Eve's voice sounded hollow and her eyes stared out the window at a suddenly empty street. Chapter 25. Aftershocks. JC sat at the end of the bathtub, her back against the wall and the pistol in both hands, pointed at the door. The gunfire outside had died, and she thought she could hear sirens, but there was no way she was moving. Hell, she'd gone out once already. Her dad had called for help, so she'd opened the door and hit the guy with the gun by reflex. Then her dad had flown across the room and tackled the man through their kitchen door. Bullets. Dozens of bullets had come through their front window. Their door had been blown apart. JC could swear she'd seen bodies lying on the kitchen floor too. Had her dad killed them? Or the guy that she'd hit? Her heart wouldn't stop racing. JC realized she was sweating too, her hair a mess. Stop breathing. Just for a second. Okay, now. One breath at a time. Come on, JC, you've made it through some grueling tests. That history exam in 8th grade, you can pull it together. She closed her eyes for a second, then panicked, yanked them open again and zeroed in on the bathroom door. That was a mistake. Keep focused, but don't close the eyes. That would be dangerous. A light tap on the door. "I've got a gun," JC shouted, her voice flying up the octaves. "JC, it's me. Dad." Fade sounded awfully calm. How did he not understand what had happened? "Are you all right?" JC replied. She stepped out of the tub, went to the door, then stopped. What if her dad was a hostage? What if the second she opened the door, they were going to jump her? What if Fade was trying to tell her something? "I'm fine, we're fine. I want to make sure you're okay." JC tried to pick out clues, some way to tell if her dad was warning her. "Dad, I'm not hurt." JC glanced at herself to make sure. Yep, no physical wounds, plenty of mental ones, but she could dwell on that later. She put her hand on the lock. "Are you going to open it?" JC took a breath. If they were planning to kill her, there wasn't much she could do about it. Wait for the police, maybe. But then they might get angry, kill her father anyway. JC adjusted her grip on the gun, held it back, ready to smack the brains out of anyone on the other side. She turned the handle, opened the door, saw her father, and swung. Fade caught her swing as it came forward, holding her wrist in his left hand and with his right, peeling the gun from her fingers. JC looked at his face. Some bruises, but otherwise intact, and collapsed. Tears came out of nowhere, part of the rush of terrified relief that whatever had happened seemed to be over. She'd lived. Fade survived. They would be all right. Hey, Fade whispered into her ear. "I need you to take a second. Pull yourself together. The police are going to be here soon, and they're going to have a lot of questions." "You can't ask me to do that," JC pushed herself into his shoulder. "You can't tell me to pull myself together after that. It's not fair." "I know," Fade replied. "I know it's not, except we don't get to choose this time, kiddo." JC sniffed, rocked back, brushed the hair out of her eyes. She could feel the cool wet on her cheeks. Already, though, the adrenaline was fading away, the terror subsiding to a tremor. A question burst through. "Who were those people, Dad? What the hell did they want?" Fade looked back towards the front, the blown open door. A pair of police cars pulled up in front of the house, lights blazing. "I don't know, but I don't think they wanted you and me." "Then why were they here?" As JC said the words, the woman, the one who'd been at the door with the cowboy that Fade had called Eve, walked around the corner. She looked worse than Fade. Cuts and burns. A dark spot on her clothes that looked like it might have been blood. They were looking for us, Eve said. Lode and I. Calls came from outside the house. Police ordering anyone inside to come out, hands visible. Come on, Fade said to the both of them. Let's try and explain this one. JC followed her father outside into the yard. Now there were 4 police cars and a van from which truly frightening SWAT team members were pouring out. They swept by JC, surrounding the house and going inside, even as Fade told the officers nobody else was in there. Then JC noticed a different set of lights. Down at the end of the block, an ambulance and paramedics rushing to put someone in the back. Looked like a woman. Dad, JC said to Fade as her father continued talking about the attack, about how they didn't know any of them or have any reason why the assault would have occurred. Dad, look. Fade paused, followed JC's pull on his sleeve and looked down the block. JC heard him swear, use a word he'd forbidden from the house, and then he took off. JC watched her father tear down the street towards the ambulance and the ruins of a sedan next to it. The police officer he'd been talking to yelled for Fade to stop, but her dad didn't hear, or didn't care. Does he know who's in there? The officer asked JC a second later, and JC shrugged. She didn't recognize the car and couldn't make out the body going into the back. All she saw was her dad yell something to the paramedics as they jumped into the ambulance, saw him turn and start running back to her as the ambulance sped away. We've got another on the way, the officer continued. You can sit down if you want. JC didn't move, didn't do anything except watch her father run back to her, a name pouring from his lips. Thalia. Chapter 26. Right attitude. The sandwich sat in front of her, unwrapped, the turkey and mayonnaise bread untouched. The choices Aaron had given Veronica weren't appetizing. It was this or nothing. Apparently, the office building wasn't near much in the way of food. All part of the strategy, Veronica figured. Keep unwanted traffic to a minimum. Give few reasons for anyone not associated with Ellsworth to come near the place. See something they weren't supposed to see. Still, compared with the movie versions of hostages, things hadn't been going too bad. She'd spent the whole day in that conference room, watching one movie or TV show after the next, occasionally looking around wondering what, if anything, would happen. Aaron came and went every hour or so, locking the door every time he departed. Turned out that a day in front of the TV felt really, really long. Her dad had better get on with making this deal, because another day like this, and she might go insane. Aaron, sitting across from her, wolfed down his sandwich. A mangling of a meal that would have impressed Veronica had she not spent most of her morning watching a series of B-level monster movies in which things far more human than sandwiches were turned to mush by gnashing teeth. How many times does this happen? Veronica asked Aaron. Her minder, her bodyguard. She wasn't sure what to call him, really. Has what happened? Aaron's reply was sticky, full of food. That when you stick a hostage in here, they wait all day. Normally, they're in another room. Normally, it's not quite so pleasant. Ellsworth thinks you're valuable. Because of my father? Aaron sat back in his seat, looked at Veronica hard. Ellsworth doesn't care a bit about what your father thinks, about who he is. Your dad has something Ellsworth wants. Same thing with you. Ellsworth thinks you might be worth keeping around. That's not creepy at all. Veronica took a bite of the sandwich. Tasted entirely like mayonnaise. She set it back down on the table. Not like that. He thinks you could be an asset, Aaron said. That maybe you'd be a fit for this type of work. What type of work? Kidnapping people? Did we actually kidnap you? Aaron said. No, they hadn't. It had been another pair. That weird man, JC's father. The woman that had come up to the car after he'd disappeared. All Ellsworth and Aaron had done was strike a deal. Bargain her life for something else. Exactly, Aaron said when Veronica spoke the thought. What we do is more business than anything. Leverage, negotiating. He thinks you have the personality for it. Guess I'll take that as a compliment, Veronica replied. Not a career option her father would approve of, certainly. But then her father hadn't seemed all that eager to get her back in the first place. So why did she care what he wanted? The door to the room opened and Ellsworth stepped in, followed by a nameless suit that Veronica didn't recognize. "Your father called back," Ellsworth said. "Says he's got what we're looking for. It's time to meet up." "Do you believe him?" Aaron said before Veronica could get a sentence formed. He sounded sincere, Ellsworth glanced at Veronica. "And if a father isn't telling the truth in exchange for his daughter, then I don't know when we could ever trust him." "All the same," Aaron said, "I'm going to recommend we triple up security." "I've already made the call." Ellsworth checked his watch. "Come on, it's time to go." Veronica left the rest of her sandwich on the table. She was going back to her dad. He'd have real food. They went back in the sedans, this time 4 of them heading outside of town, to a park apparently on the border of the city. "A little too public for my taste," Ellsworth was saying to her as they rode in the back seat. "But I'm not going to argue. Makes it less likely something strange will happen." "Strange?" "In case you haven't realized it, the people we're dealing with aren't exactly upstanding citizens. Be honest, you think your dad is some kind of hero?" Ellsworth said. He leaned into his seat, pulled out another cigar and lit it. Tangy, sweet smoke filled the cabin, and Veronica cracked her window to let it out. "I don't think he's the best father, if that's what you're saying." Ellsworth shifted his shoulders slightly. "You'll do better if you start every person with the same 2 questions. What do they want, and what are they afraid to lose? If you don't know the answers, then you don't know the person." "So what does my father want?" "Same thing I do." Ellsworth looked out his tinted window. Veronica had the impression the man wasn't really in the car right then, wasn't in the same reality she was. "The badge you mentioned? It's a method, Veronica," Ellsworth said, not turning away from the window. "The badge is a way of getting closer." "To what?" "I don't know. Don't think your father does either. Could be heaven, could be hell. Either one would be worth seeing." "You're not making sense. I've been doing this for a while. Eventually you talk in riddles all the time, seeing as telling the truth can get you arrested, killed. Live with a little mystery, Veronica. It won't hurt you." "Now you sound like my father." Ellsworth didn't say anything. In the silent vacuum, Veronica suddenly missed her phone. She tried to see if Ellsworth still had it in his pocket. Couldn't make it out for sure. Aaron driving. Could have it too. "Nobody chooses to get into this." Ellsworth's tone had changed. Lightened. "You audition even if you don't mean to, and then you're swept up in it, rushing from one deal to the next, never knowing if you'll finally run out of luck this time." "You sound like a movie." "If your dad called the police, we'll kill you." Ellsworth reached into his jacket, pulled out a gun. Veronica didn't feel any fear staring at the black thing. It wasn't that she didn't think Ellsworth would kill her. It was, she realized, because she knew what he wanted, and that he wasn't ready to lose that opportunity by killing her. He knows that. So either this is going to be an honest trade, or we're going to wind up dead. Those are the only 2 options. Tends to be how these things go. "You make this sound like such a good career." "It's not a career." Ellsworth puffed closer to the ashy end of the cigar. Veronica looked for a tray, then realized Ellsworth had been dropping the ashes onto the floor of the car. The mats were hard plastic, easy to wash, not likely to burn. "It's a way of life." Outside, the business parks fell away and houses began to take their place. Quiet neighborhoods starting to fill in on a Wednesday evening. Families coming home, repositioning for nighttime practices, dinners, recitals. The traffic slowed their cars down. As they passed by a school, Veronica turned back to Ellsworth. "You said it's a way of life. Aaron mentioned you thought I'd be good at it. Why?" "You've got the killer instinct," Ellsworth said. "I can see it, lurking there in your eyes. You may not think it now, but if you had to, you could pull the trigger. You could make a choice that would cost lives, that would benefit your own." "How do you know that?" "Because I know a lot of killers. Because I am one." Ellsworth ditched the cigar on the floor. Veronica got the sense Ellsworth was done talking, so she sat back and waited for the show to begin. 10 minutes later, the 4 sedans pulled into a large parking lot. A wide park sat behind it, full of soccer fields. Kids should have been playing, practicing, But maybe the three SUVs, white and large, scared them away. Maybe her father, standing in the middle of a group of people in black outfits, paid them all to go home. That would be like him. When the car stopped, Ellsworth got out first. Then Aaron opened the door for her. Veronica stood, took a few steps towards her father, then Aaron grabbed her arm. Hard. "You see?" Ellsworth announced to the group. "She's fine." Her father nodded. "Glad to see you kept your word." "You keep yours?" Ellsworth countered. "You have the badge?" Christopher reached inside the pocket of his gray slacks, pulled out a thing that looked like a small green brooch. It didn't really have designs that Veronica could see. It was about as large as her father's hand. Bordered was what looked like a gold ring. "I'm assuming this is what you want?" "You assume correctly. Then we have a deal. Veronica for the badge." Ellsworth held out his hand. Christopher took 3 steps forward and set the device gently into Ellsworth's palm. Veronica had never seen her father handle something that way, with so much reverence. It was almost as though he was handling eggs or a child. She felt Aaron relax the grip on her arm, felt him push her forward, heard him say to keep walking. "Come on, Veronica," her father said, glancing at his watch. "This is already taking too long." "Sorry, Father," Veronica said as she walked over to his side of the parking lot. "I'll try to get released faster next time." "There won't be a next time," her father said. Veronica threw him a questioning glance, one that twisted as she watched her father reach inside his breast pocket, pull out a gun. At the same time, the other 5 security force members pulled out their own. Veronica turned to see Ellsworth and Aaron dive towards their sedan, saw Ellsworth's other guards make their own moves for their weapons. They weren't fast enough. Gunfire erupted, loud and constant, shattered the quiet air. It wasn't over in minutes, it was over in seconds. Bodies lay across the asphalt. Blood pooled beneath the vehicles. Her father pushed past her, over to the car, where Ellsworth, half inside the door, leaned against his seat. He'd been hit at least 3 or 4 times by Veronica's count, and the man looked to be rapidly bleeding out whatever he had in him onto the ground. "This is what happens when people try to kidnap my family," Christopher Pline said as he came up to Ellsworth, as he plucked the badge from the man's hand. "I don't tolerate threats, especially not this kind." With the badge back, Veronica's father walked to her and ushered her inside one of the white SUVs. Veronica couldn't think of what to say, what to do, so she slid into the seat and stared out at the carnage. "Put on your seatbelt," her father said as they drove away. "You know better." Chapter 27. Clues in White. Surgery. That's what they told him when Fade made it to the hospital. When he ran through the emergency department, when a nurse grabbed him, a security guard coming up behind. They've already wheeled her in, given anesthesia. The nurse took a harder glance at Fade, seemed to realize that he didn't look much like Thalia. "Are you her husband or something?" "A friend." Fade looked down the hallway towards the closed double doors, saw only people, a stretcher against the wall. No sign of Thalia. "Then I'm sorry, but I can't really tell you more. The operation could take a while." The nurse guided Fade back towards the waiting room. "What's the risk?" Fade said. "What are her chances?" The nurse shook her head. "I'm sorry, I wasn't working with her, but I'll let the doctor know you're waiting." Waiting. The nurse handed Fade off to the security guard, who grumbled about not running around the department, and found a chair. Families crowded the area, blending with couples and individuals, all looking as though this was the worst evening of their lives. Some had ghosts in their eyes, looks that said they'd seen this particular place far too often. Fade himself had his fair share of visits here, mostly for minor repairs. A broken nose, stitches. Except for that one night, with Maggie, it had been a little like this one, though later, well after dark, when everything had already stopped seeming real. Fade took out his phone, glanced at the messages. JC and Eve were going to a hotel. The police didn't want them staying at the house at night. It was a crime scene and one that needed investigating. Always a chance whomever had come after them would come back for another shot, so his daughter was off to somewhere else. What a success for his father-daughter date night. Some bullets in a ruined house, a friend sent to the hospital. If Fade thought JC was going to forgive him for the party, well, now he had a whole host of other problems to deal with, not least of which was explaining what this all was to his daughter. Fade played the conversation in his head, ran over a ways to say that he kidnaps, beats up, and otherwise performs the slimy stuff for cash to his daughter. There wasn't a way to phrase it he could think of that didn't end with JC walking out, demanding to be left with a friend. Spending the years until Fade found himself capped in a dark street, seeing each other for occasional lattes, JC always showing that betrayal in her eyes. He shook his head. Maybe that was a little too dramatic. Figures it'd be you. A familiar voice, as threatening a tone as the last time Fade had heard it. What do you want, Oscar? Fade looked up at Talia's uncle standing over him. I want to know what happened, Oscar said. When I get the call that my niece is here, and I see you sitting in this chair, then I know something went very wrong. Wasn't my fault. I'll be the one to decide that, Oscar replied. He glared at a lady in the seat next to Fade until, her head swiveling back and forth between the two of them, she edged over a spot. Oscar plopped himself down. Talia's uncle wore a thick beige jacket, a hat. The bill came far over his face, kept it in shadow. Fade always thought that looked ridiculous, like a slapdash private eye from the 1940s. We were attacked, Fade said. They shot up my house. Who shot up your house? I don't know, Fade said. With our work, these things can happen. I thought you were staying away from the risky stuff, Oscar said. I thought that's what we agreed. Agreed? It's a two-way deal, Oscar. Talia said you approached her again. Now Oscar shifted, his vicious stare slipping into contrition. For a second. Then the mask slipped back on. We've had our own difficulties, had openings. Openings Thalia could fill. That doesn't excuse you taking bad contracts. This wasn't a contract, at least not one I took. Oscar pressed for more, and Fade at this point didn't care to argue. Gave him the details. Told Oscar about the cowboy and Eve. About how they'd shown up at the house 20 minutes before all the fun started. About the attackers and their white SUVs. How they'd seemed intent on killing all of them. How they left as soon as they'd taken the cowboy. White SUVs? Oscar said. No decals? New? I suppose so, yeah. Most places don't bother with white ones, Oscar said. They get dirty. Bullet holes show easy. You have something to tell me. Just tell me, Fade said. I didn't come here to talk to you. 0-point security, Oscar said. That's who I'd check, an operator that I normally see in white. They'd shoot up a house in broad daylight? For the right price. What has this city come to? Fade said. It's always been this way, Oscar replied. You've been keeping your eyes too high, not getting down in the dirt. A lot of good that did me. Look, Fade, Oscar said. Here's the deal. I want my niece back. If she gets out of this, she's coming with me, staying away from you and all your issues. Last I checked, Thalia can make her own decisions. Last I checked, you could be killed anytime I wanted. Oscar turned to him. Do you know what? I got you pegged as the type that doesn't let things go. So how about this? You go, you find 0-point, and if they're the ones that shot up Thalia, you make them pay. You do that, I'll back off. Why don't you do it? You got all the people. It's not my mess to clean up. Fade looked away, at the chairs, the clock hanging on the wall, a TV showing evening news. Yeah, Fade didn't let go of things, he stuck with them. A dog pulling a rope, snarling and gnashing until he got it away. Call me when they say something, Fade said as he left. Chapter 28. Chips in conversation. JC checked into the hotel, declining to sign up for the reward program. Get those bonus points every time their house was destroyed? Plenty of homework sat in her backpack, and all JC could think about was how it sounded as bullets embedded themselves into the walls around her. How it felt to smack a man in the face with a gun that was now in Eve's own backpack. The woman didn't seem to have anything else, didn't remove any gear from her car, told JC to only get one room. Then again, It wasn't like Eve was staying at their house. She probably had her own place, was spending this much time with JC out of pity. Hungry? Eve said as she watched JC drop her stuff in the room. A pair of full beds, non-committal art on the walls. Her dad on a budget, but there didn't seem to be bugs. No odd smells or pounding beats from the rooms next door. Sure, JC said, but you don't have to stay, you know. I'm 16. I can handle myself. No doubt, Eve said. Only I have some questions I'd like to ask you. The police already asked me plenty, JC replied. What did Eve want from her anyway? She'd barged into their house. It wasn't like they were going to be friends, but JC could feel the pinch in her stomach, the growing anxiety that could only be quelled with a suitable application of cuisine. It seemed like Eve might be willing to pay, and since her dad had run off without giving her any cash, JC took advantage. Across the street from the hotel sat a bedazzled Mexican outlet, the kind that complemented its hanging lights and giant cactus with 50 menu items all, somehow combining the same 5 ingredients, somehow always tasting so damn good. They settled into a booth. Waters and chips and salsa appeared, as if by magic, a second later. What do you want? JC said as Eve bit into a chip. Why did you come to our house? We wanted your father. Eve spoke quickly after she swallowed the chip, reached for another one. He's not an easy man to find. What for? I can't tell you, Eve said. Can I ask the questions now? After those answers, yeah, I guess I'm satisfied. Eve didn't seem to get the joke. She ate a couple more chips, ordered a margarita, began asking things. JC expected hard questions, expected some sort of interrogation about what her father did. Instead, Eve asked more about who he was. Did he laugh a lot? What kind of movies did he enjoy? Did Fade ever hang out and do normal things? Are there a lot of weapons in the house? What were his favorite books? I feel like you're trying to date him, JC finally said, which if that's what you're thinking, try someone else. He's kind of broken upstairs. How so? My mom, she died a couple of years ago. We didn't take it well. He's still not over it? I'm still not over it, JC shot a glare across the table. Sorry, I didn't mean to offend. Eve took a long pull from the margarita, standard on the rocks. You have to understand, time means different things to me than it does to you. I have to understand, JC said. God forgive me then, because that made no sense at all. I get that a lot, Eve said. JC's phone buzzed, a text from Fade. She glanced at it, checking something out for Thalia. You okay? Fine. Taco night part 2. JC looked up at Eve. Looks like Fade isn't going to be here anytime soon. Oh no? Says he's doing something for Thalia. It's usual for him. He just disappears. Also like him to blow her off again. Leave JC alone after that kind of trauma. Such a nice father. She eyed Eve's margarita. Maybe Eve would buy some for her. JC might need it to get through the night. I'll leave you the money, Eve said. I have to go. We haven't even ordered food? The chips were enough. Eve lifted the margarita and guzzled the whole thing, slapped a pair of 20s on the table, stood up and left. JC watched her go, pulled out her phone, prayed for the internet to take the world away. Chapter 29. Trick play. 0-point security. Housed in a big block of a building along with a scattering of other companies, a bank, an insurance agency, IT groups with names that gave Fade no clue as to their purpose, and on the ground floor, a Greek sandwich place. Gyros for everyone. When Fade pulled up, the lime-teal digital clock on his dash showed 10 o'clock. A barren parking lot, but enough lights were on in the building to illustrate that the place wasn't a strictly 9-to-5 operation. Fade looked for an inconspicuous spot and failed to find one. Parked one row away from a light and looked over at the wide glass entrance. Tried to see what he was dealing with. Inside a pair of transparent doors with large chromed handles, behind a circular fake wood desk, sat a security guard that looked, contrary to expectations, alert. The man wasn't staring at a TV either. Even from his car, Fade could feel the eyes on him. Vigilance. Must be paying the guard a good chunk of change to get that commitment. Fade glanced at his phone. No updates. No text from Oscar. Nothing from JC. Thank God she wasn't 21, or Fade would assume, after a day like this, that she'd found a bar to close down. He walked up to the building doors and tested the handles. They shook but didn't open. The guard watched him. Fade caught his glance, held up his right hand, gave a wave. Maybe the old-fashioned way would work. The guard leaned over and pushed a button near the desk. Didn't have to get up to talk to Fade, ruining any chance of a surprise attack and entry. Technology ruins everything. You can talk through the intercom. The guard's voice came out of a small, vented yellow square to the left of the door. Fade turned to it, looked back to the guard. He didn't like the odds. I need to see someone at 0 Point. I got nothing for a meeting at this hour, the guard replied. What's the name? Smith, Fade said. I don't think so, sir. The guard didn't even do a cursory check. You want to step away from here, quietly, before I call the police and report an attempted break-in. That won't be necessary. A new voice, Eve, walking up behind Fade and stepping to the door. She brushed back her hair with one hand, the other in the pocket of her light blue windbreaker. Who are you? The guard said through the intercom. Eve pulled a small device from her jacket pocket, one Fade recognized. Lode had it before, had pulled it out at the dry dock. Eve pointed it at the guard through the door. There was a flash, and then the guard collapsed. Face down on the desk, hat rolling off his head onto the floor. Neat trick, Fade said. And I have other questions. Believe me, we're still on the outside. You've not broken doors like this before? Eve said. She took a step back, set her stance, wheeled and delivered a sharp kick right above the glass door's handle. The lock dislodged, and the door fell inward, catching itself on its own hinges and wobbling at an angle. I prefer not to let everyone know what's going on, Fade said. Going to be hard to hide this one. I don't think it's going to matter. Fade would have asked why, but Eve walked in. He shrugged and followed. Given how today had gone, Fade was through trying to control things. Rolling with events seemed the best he could do. Weren't you supposed to be with JC? Fade asked as they went up to the guard. Eve waited as Fade reached down and tugged the key card and ID badge off of the unconscious body. We had dinner. She had schoolwork. I did not. You don't? Could have fooled me. Now Eve looked puzzled. Do I look like a child to you? It's a bad joke, trying to say you look young. Like... Fade sighed. Eve continued to look confused. Never mind. Let's go. They looked at the directory. 0 Point owned the 3rd floor. To the elevators? After you, Eve said. Fade didn't argue. Went over, tried swiping the stolen card into the reader, and when the elevator doors opened, they went in and rode it up to floor 3. 0 Point began with a low-key lobby, 4 chairs, an unmanned reception desk, and another set of locked doors leading further back. Fade went up to the entrance and tapped the guard badge. Nothing. Guess 0 Point doesn't trust the building's security. Fade inspected the doors, not quite as flimsy as the ones downstairs. Bigger locks, thicker glass. I don't think I can kick these open, Eve said, confirming Fade's assessment. Don't worry, I've got a plan for this one. Fade pressed the call button near the door. He could hear the buzzer going off on the other side. Fade figured either someone worked late, or maybe a janitor or someone else would be in here. Security companies had to have people on overnight, right? The sound of footfalls came seconds later, paired with a groggy-looking dude in a stained white-collared shirt and jeans. He stopped far away from the door and stared at them. Fade pantomimed opening the door, but the guy didn't budge. Eve started to reach for her flashing device again, but Fade grabbed her arm. If we can't get through these doors, this whole thing is pointless. The man behind the glass turned around, went to the reception desk, picked up the phone and dialed. Fade could tell by the man's face what number he was calling. Security downstairs wasn't going to pick up. Try to hurt me, Eve said. What? Try to hurt me. He'll think we're having a fight, and he'll try to help me. Eve shifted into a panicked expression as she said this. Gave Fade a push. Fade turned back to her. Sure. Why not go crazy? When Eve went for Fade again, he pushed her back, shoved her. Harder, Eve said as she bounced off the wall. Came rushing back at Fade, who tripped her. Eve fell to the floor. In the corner of his eye, Fade caught the man putting the phone down on the receiver. Looking at them, Fade kicked Eve, a sharp jerking motion, pulling it back just before his foot hit. Coming at her, where Eve, on her side, hit her stomach from the 0-point man's view. The man wouldn't see Fade pulling his kicks, wouldn't be able to tell Fade wasn't, in fact, laying into a helpless woman. One kick after another. Eve looked like she was in pain, screwed up her face, tried to curl up. Fade heard the lock turn, heard the door open. What the hell, man? Yelled the guy, and Fade turned and grabbed him, pressed the man into the door, and held it open. Eve curled up and slipped behind him, and Fade saw the man's eyes go wide as he noticed she was fine, then fall as he realized the trick. Is there anyone else here? Fade said after they'd pulled the 0-point man back through the doors to his desk. Fade loomed over him while Eve kept watch for any other surprise guests. Nobody, I swear. I'm just here to handle the phones late night. Nobody pays us to guard our own building, so I'm the only one here. We need to find a contract, Fade said, from this afternoon. He let the man log into the computer. Pull up the index of jobs, fields to search by client, time and address, along with various numbers Fade didn't know. What are you looking for? The man asked. Not your business. Yeah, well, I can help you find it faster if I know what I'm searching for, the man replied. I wanted to know who paid for it. Who ordered it? This afternoon? The man pulled up series of contracts that had been filled in the last 8 hours. Towards the middle, Fade caught the address. Saw the name. Christopher Pline? Tech billionaire, you know him? The guy said. I've heard the name. The guy whistled. Look at that budget. Hell of an expensive raid. It wasn't pleasant. Fade knew he shouldn't have said the words. They'd give him away. But Fade didn't care. He pulled the man from his chair, planning to tie the man somewhere conspicuous, when he heard sounds from the hallway. An elevator chimed, lots of footfalls thudding on the carpet. Fade glanced out the window. The parking lot looked more crowded. White SUVs filling the rows. What did you do? Fade said. Give up, man, the 0-point guy said. You can't get out of here. There's too many of us. Then we run, Eve said. Before Fade could do anything else, Eve popped the guard in the forehead, sending him tumbling back into his desk. Then she grabbed Fade's wrist and pulled him away, down the rows of cubicles and into what looked like a supply room. No windows, only shelf after shelf stocked with paper, ink cartridges, and envelopes. Interesting choice, why don't you, Fade said as Eve shut the door behind them. Hold on to this. Eve pulled a green brooch with a gold border around it up through her shirt, where it had been hanging on a matching gold chain. Fade thought about asking what was going to happen, but the sounds of the approaching 0-point security were loud and coming fast. He grabbed the end of the gem, and Eve held the other side. And then they were gone. Chapter 30. Christopher gave her 10 minutes to get her phone and anything else she wanted to take with her. Pack a suitcase. He didn't say for how long, so Veronica stuffed it as full as she could. Snagged essentials, shampoo and soap, toothpaste. The way Christopher looked, Veronica wasn't assuming anything. As she left the room, Veronica hesitated, her finger on the light switch, looked across the perfect princess space and then dropped it into darkness. Where's Grady? Veronica asked her father as she locked her house behind her. Reassigned. Christopher kept his eyes glued to his phone. Why? Because he failed. Veronica started to argue, then stopped. Christopher wasn't wrong. Grady hadn't kept her from being kidnapped. Why should she want him around? Because I liked him wasn't good enough. Tucked back in the SUV, they drove north as the sun finished setting behind the coastal mountains, wound up through a valley, past farms and wineries, moonlight shading their ghostly fields. Veronica tried to start conversations, but Christopher seemed to get calls every time she tried. When he'd hang up, Veronica would watch him glance out the window for a long second before invariably the phone rang again, and she thought her own life was hectic. A left turn up a narrow road and through a gate. Not the sort of fanciful iron Veronica had expected, but a straight, hard force of industry. Decor wasn't top priority. The driver sped them along, and Veronica leaned forward, looking out the windshield. In front of them, up a long hill with a thick screen of trees keeping anyone from seeing anything from the street, rose what Christopher called the compound. The combination lab and dormitory rose at least 4 stories, topping with a wide flat roof. Even at night, the solar arrays twinkled. One empty section promised a helipad. Beneath the roof, the floors had windows in haphazard arrangements, as though the builder had run out of supplies fitfully and kept on going regardless. A rounded bulge came out towards them, a 3-story cylinder bolted onto what was otherwise a box-like building. At the bottom of it, along the driveway, a garage opened, a half-circle of unnatural light in the starlit night. "I've never been here before." Veronica kept looking, taking the compound in. "It's business." Christopher hung up his phone, shared his daughter's moment. "We don't let the public into this one." "I'm the public?" "You know what I mean." Veronica did. She had to give him that. Always secrets lurking at the edges of family conversations, of career days as a child. Even her grandparents, both now dead, followed in her father's tradition of only saying what needed to be said and nothing more. Maybe that's why she'd taken to hosting so many parties, counteracting the cold gatherings of her childhood with vodka-soaked warmth. "So why are you taking me here now?" "Because you witnessed a man, several actually, shot in front of you." Christopher said the words the way her teachers would explain a math problem. Simple facts. "I need to make sure you're all right. This is a strange form of therapy. We could use some family time." Inside the garage, Veronica expected a tall ceiling, maybe something going up to the top of the cylinder. Instead, lights hung low and close. Sterile white stucco barely missed the top of the SUV. It was almost claustrophobic, especially with all the other cars crowding the space. Unlike the model white SUVs, the other vehicles came in variety Veronica was used to. Sedans and minivans, colors and quality all over the place. Seeing them calmed her down. Normalcy happened here sometimes. Her father led her from the SUV, a man followed them, carrying her suitcase and backpack. All of her school supplies. Though Veronica had a feeling she wouldn't be heading in tomorrow. Inspiration comes in many forms. Christopher led her along a twisty path through clean hallways, more tile than carpet. Pictures spaced the walls at even intervals, only they weren't paintings, weren't photographs. Instead, they looked like documents. These, like the legions of Rome, are our army. Each and every one is a patent, Veronica. The strength of our company, of our family. "How many do you have?" Veronica asked the question more to keep Christopher talking than anything else. She didn't want him to shut down again. Go back to his phone, not here, in a place so strange. They passed people in the halls, some in lab coats, others in suits, still others in T-shirts and dusty jeans. All of them gave her father nods, nods that he returned. Mutual respect. What would it take for her to earn that? "Never enough," Christopher replied. They moved into the building's central staircase. The walls here, tall and cream, held a whirling timeline that crawled through the company's history. The top story, Veronica noted, was still blank. They went up a floor to the second story and turned right, walked towards the far side of the building. The rooms here became more numerous. Veronica thought she could hear a shower, and then her father opened a door and she looked into a normal, if small, bedroom. "This is where you'll stay tonight." Her father looked over the room, took a deep breath. "Veronica, I don't want to lie to you. You won't be going to school tomorrow. You won't be leaving here until we can be sure the matter is resolved." "What matter?" Her father's mouth opened, then closed, reconfigured itself into a concerned frown. Christopher put a hand on her shoulder. "You, Veronica, you look like you're handling this well, but I'd like to be sure before sending you back. Someone will be coming by in the morning. Until then, get some sleep. Understand that you're safe." Can I at least have my phone back? I'm sorry. I need you to relax, not stay up all night chatting with your friends. If you like, there is a television in the common area. Plenty of books and magazines. The man behind her father, carrying Veronica's backpack and suitcase, tapped her father on the shoulder. Yes, I know. Veronica, I have to go. I'll see you tomorrow. They hugged. It wasn't much to talk about. After Christopher left, Veronica put her stuff together, then realized how badly she wanted to shower. Accomplished that in the industrial-grade facilities here. All the charm of a hospital, but she felt better. Good enough to lay down in the bed and rest her eyes for a few minutes. Veronica woke up when she heard a thump outside the door, in the hallway. Veronica looked at the small clock on the nightstand, a little past midnight. Another loud bang and Veronica flinched. No, not a gunshot, at least not one that she'd heard before. A couple more shots went off, pops muffled by the walls. Scuffling outside, and the door to her room burst open, a body flying through it and landing on her floor. The room's automatic lights flicked on and gave the body bloody clarity. Veronica tore her eyes away from the disaster into the man standing over it. "The hell are you?" the man spoke with a drawl, as if coming out of the deep south but a century ago. Sounded fiery and old, only he didn't look more than a scruffy 30. "Veronica," she said, and then decided to up her net worth. "I'm the daughter of the man who runs this place. You're saying I shouldn't kill you?" Veronica shrugged. "I'm saying I might be worth more to you alive than dead." "You just might. How about you get up? Come on over here. Show me the way out. Oh, and seeing as we're going to be friends, I'll make a proper introduction. You can call me Load." From one hostage crisis to another. Veronica stood, went over to the man. Let him steer her from the room and back into the hallway. No alarms, no shouts. Veronica could see another pair of guards on the floor, knocked out or dead. "Nice work," Veronica said. These were her father's employees, but she didn't feel much of anything. Too stunned? Maybe. Or too tired. Or just, at this point, Veronica realized she had no capacity to care anymore. All references from her life were useless in this situation, so it was either panic or lean on her own strength. "They're a bunch of worthless kids," Load said. "Your father needs to teach his men how to fight with something other than a gun." "I'll let him know." Veronica started walking down the hallway towards the staircase. "Wait," Load said. "I need two things first. They've got my badge and my pistol. No idea where those are. Then let's keep moving till we find someone that does." Load pushed Veronica forward, albeit gently. She obliged, walked back out of the dormitory and into a set of what appeared to be stocking rooms. They passed by one, in which an unfortunate soul was digging through a large box marked Fragile. Her captor saw the man too, whispered to Veronica to stay to the side as he went in. Load laid a heavy hand on the man's shoulder, pulled him away from the box and turned him around. Veronica saw the guy's eyes widen, his mouth open and sweat almost instantly appear in a shiny sheen on his forehead. "You're going to take me to my things," Load said. "I don't know where they are," the man replied. "See now, what I used to do with liars was leave them out in the desert with nothing but the vultures for company," Load said. "Problem is, here I don't have any desert. No vultures neither. So I'm guessing I'll have to come up with something new." "Well, I don't know exactly where they are, but I could get you close," the man offered, his voice rising to a squeak. "Now that might just do the trick." Load twisted the man around and shoved him out of the room first. Veronica fell into step alongside them and they marched, an odd trio, by the central staircase and over to the left side. A pair of thick sealed doors closed off the hallway in front of them. The new hostage pulled out his badge and pressed it against a slate pad on the left wall. It buzzed and the door shot open. On the other side, all pretenses at a normal office space fell away. The walls were hard along with the floor, coated in some plastic substance. If the light had been sterile before, it was even whiter now. But the place seemed empty. "You're lucky," their hostage said. Veronica blinked for a second. His hostage. Load. They were both his prisoners. She couldn't go shifting, like she'd done with Ellsworth, over to the other side. We don't keep much of a crew here weeknights unless there's something big going on. I'm just here in case something goes wrong. Good thing, because something did, Lode said. Now keep moving. Down some more paths until they came to another sealed door. The man's key card let them in, and on the other side, hanging in bags marked in bold letters, decontamination, appeared to be a cowboy's deep brown coat, a wide-brimmed hat, a pistol and wallet, among other small things. This is all of it, the hostage said. Feel free. Take it. Lode sneered at the scientist, tore down his bags and slipped on the coat, slipped on the belt and slid the pistol into the holster. There was room for a second pistol, but the cowboy didn't ask about that. At one point, Veronica swore she saw a green gemstone appear before it vanished into Lode's pocket. Properly outfitted, Lode walked up to the scientist. Thanks. Lode, faster than Veronica could see, jacked the scientist, crumpled him to the floor. The cowboy reached down, pulled off the man's ID card, and then nodded for Veronica to head outside. You didn't have to do that, Veronica said as they went back toward the central staircase. He was cooperating. Thing is, most people cooperate until they stop. I don't like giving them that opportunity. They descended the staircase and went back out into the garage. 3 cars were there, the white SUVs long gone. Can I ask you something? Veronica said as they approached the exit. You can talk, can't you? Who are you? Already told you. Lode's the name. He didn't offer anything else. The far exit from the garage was a simple push door. Lode shoved it open and they walked back into the night. Veronica looked around. No guards. For all her dad's talk about this being a fortress, it certainly didn't act like it. This is where we part ways, Lode said. Wait, don't hurt me. Wasn't going to, Lode gave her a long look. Take care of yourself. And then the cowboy left her there, standing in the dark, alone.